Good evening. I believe this is our 6th class on Genjo Koan. And last week we started to get into section 8, the famous firewood and ash section. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that tonight, and then we'll get into 9 and 10. That's kind of interesting to me, thinking about the pacing of going through different sections of the text, that there's several places here where Dogen Zenji uses a kind of image, and he's explaining the image. And so it's not as linguistically heavy, like what exactly does that word mean? He's like referring to an image, so you can move through it like more quickly. And then there's other places where it's really laden with Buddhist terminology and that kind of thing. So that seems to be the case. So tonight we'll look at that bit, and then next week we'll look at, tonight I'm hoping to get through 9 and 10, and then we'll look at 11 and 12 next week, and then the last week we'll clean up with the koan, and then for sure we'll be behind. There's no way we'll be behind, so we'll have more to do there. So this week, after the class last week, I was thinking a lot about this term Dharma position. And so as I was framing last week, that in the first several sections where Dogen Zenji is talking about the nature of the path, he's talking a lot in terms of spatial relationships. So he's talking about to carry the self forward and to carry out practice realization is delusion. To carry out practice realization through all things is delusion. That all things come forward and carry out practice realization through the self is realization. So the self and other becomes the reference in many different ways, particularly in section 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. And when we get to 8, then Dogen Zenji starts to talk about the same type of relationship, but now he's talking about it with reference to time. And he uses this term in section 8, which is a technical Buddhist term, and is really important to understanding Dogen Zenji's way of presenting the Dharma. And that is this term Dharma position. So he says, firewood becomes ash. Ash cannot turn back into firewood again. However, we should not view ash as after and firewood before. We should know that firewood dwells in the Dharma position of firewood and has its own before and after. Although there is before and after, past and future are cut off. And then he says the same thing of ash. Ash stays at the position of ash, and it has its own before and after. Right? So this term Dharma position is an interesting term. I have this big fat dictionary that's published by the Soto Zen School of Japan. It's the Zen Terminology Dictionary. It's really fat. I should have brought it in and show you. It's really it's one of those books that when you close it, it sounds really good. It goes boom, and it's full of words. So I thought, well, I wonder what this dictionary, how it explains Dharma position. And so these are kind of rough translations, but it says dharmas, or we could also say the appearance of all things, just as they are, or just as it is. Another definition would be, building on this, the appearance of all things, just as they are, is eternally abiding and absolute. Or the appearance of all things, just as they are, has eternally abiding and absolute significance. So these are just kind of like, dictionaries are actually not so good at telling you what something means, but they kind of point in a direction. It's hard to define many words. I mean, it's even hard to define like apple. But these definitions kind of point us in a direction. So if we think about the definition, we say all things. So dharma is a technical term. In this usage, it means any object of mind. So eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind all have objects. Eyes have visual objects. Ears have auditory objects. Noses have olfactory objects. Tongues have taste objects. bodily sensation, we have physical objects. And the mind has dharmas. Okay? So consciousness, anything that it experiences, any phenomena, that's a technical definition of what a dharma is. Now, it's interesting that dharma also means law and total truth, and it's all the same word. Okay? But here, if we think in this case of dharma position, is being calling out all phenomena, any and all phenomena, anything that appears has eternally abiding absolute significance. It is true in its appearance. Right? So this teaching of the Dharma position is integral to what Dogen Zenji is saying here about the spatial relationships, but also the time relationships with things. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking of an image that people are pretty familiar with is the diamond net of Indra. It comes from the Huayan Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra. This is my beautiful depiction of such jeweled net. The first one I drew on my paper all had straight lines. And then when I drew this, I thought, oh, let's have curvy lines. So however you like the lines, that's fine. But in this image from the Flower Garland Sutra, it's trying to explain what is the awakening that a Buddha has. In one way, we could understand all sutras are that, and particularly the Flower Garland Sutra. It's supposed to be sometimes people call it the contents of Buddha's awakening. Right? What was the awakening that the Buddha had? And the flower in the Flower Garland Sutra, and the jewel net of Indra is one way to try to explain that. It's an image to try to explain that. And so, as the explanation goes, that all dharmas are like a massive multidimensional net, and every dharma is a jewel that is infinitely faceted. I've represented those infinite facets with 8 facets. On the side you can see, but remember the 3-dimensional. So this totally multifaceted, uncountably faceted gem, and it is reflecting every other gem in the multidimensional net, and that's what's referred to as Indra's net. Indra would be the god of all being, right? And that's how dharmas are. Right? Coming from that kind of teaching in the Huayan school, we get teachings like one moment is 3,000, or one mind moment is the 3,000 things, which means one phenomena, one moment of phenomena, all things are included in that phenomena. So this image, I think, is not so difficult for us to understand the image. How that then relates to, it's just an image. It's just a kind of a expedient means to give us some idea about what's going on. How does that translate into Dharma understanding, and then Dharma activity, otherwise known as practice? So, does this kind of make sense? A very famous teacher, Fa-Tsang, who is a Chinese, one of the great masters of Chinese Buddhism, is honored in many of the schools as being an ancestor in their schools. Amazing. He wrote so much stuff, unbelievable amount of stuff. He was the tutor to the emperor's wife, and Empress Wu. And it said that he was trying to teach her about this concept, and she wasn't getting it. And so this is another image that you could think of that's similar. Said that because she was the empress, he could say, "Hey, let's do this," and they had the resources to do it. He had them build a room in which he covered all the surfaces of the room in mirrors, including the doorway that went in. And then he put a candle in the middle of the room, and then he invited her to come into the room. And then he said, "This is what I've been talking about. These infinite jewels that all reflect each other." And has anyone ever been in one of those get made sometimes, and you can go, have you been in one before, Rokan? Yeah. Say again? They're that, yeah.
Crazy, super crazy.
Yeah. I was at one at there's a big Chinese temple just outside of LA, just on the outskirts of LA, and went there with some of my Dharma brothers when I was down in LA one time, and they had a kind of small version of that. It was like one part of this hallway, and just the hallway, it wasn't even a whole room, just the hallway. You walk in and you're just like, whoa. And it would set you in a different mind state when you were there. So again, that's another kind of image we could think of, that the phenomena are both completely independently just what they are and reflecting everything else at the same time. That's the what's being meant here by a Dharma position. Now, when we think about that in terms of space, okay, because we're talking about it in a kind of spatial relationship way, I think that clicks with us. And if we then take that Dharma position and we apply it to time, that's what Dogen's doing here in this 8th section. He's saying, yeah, sure. From one perspective, we could look at firewood and we could say firewood burns and then it turns into ash. That's one understanding of it when we're concerned with the past and the future. But it's also true that firewood is in the Dharma position of firewood. And at that Dharma position of firewood, there is a before and after of that firewood. The before and after of the firewood is like these reflections that happen in a spatial relationship. It's happening in a time relationship. But that's different than what we normally call a past and a future. What we call in a past and a future is this kind of relational log of things moving through time in a direction. And he's saying here that that's not the only way that things are. Things are also just what they are at the moment that they are. And in fact, time is not moving. Right? That there is a movement that we call time, but it isn't that relationality in time is in itself always have to be about the past and the future and the present. So this is, I think, one of the more challenging parts of the Genjo Koan, because it kind of works on our mind in a way that isn't quite as intuitive, or maybe that we're just not as used to thinking about. But you can think about this within your practice of Zazen. As you're sitting and you think, well, okay, I'm here, and as things calm down a bit, it's quite natural to see how, okay, I can't really tell exactly. There's a bird calling. The bird's call is just the bird's call, right? 100%. But also, me hearing the bird's call is 100%. And I can't quite say, is the bird out there, is the bird in here? I couldn't say either one. It's like these jewels that are totally reflecting. But the jewels are so completely and totally reflecting, I can't even say it's two jewels. I can't kind of take the third person perspective and say there's me listening and there's the jewel. I mean, I can, but then it all breaks down. So spatially, that's true. That's something we can investigate in Zazen. I'd invite you from this teaching to also investigate that with time. So time can be a big challenge when you're sitting. 40 minutes. You're like, when's the bell going to ring? Sometimes you might feel like that, right? But when you settle down and you consider, if you sit with the posture that each moment is a Dharma position, it has a before and an after, but the before and the after are not coming and going. Each moment is the expression of all before and all after in that moment. That the mirror, that is this jewel, isn't like hedged in by a past and future. That's a kind of mistake that we make about thinking about time. We think like people will say, oh, right here, right now. And the right now is like a reference to something that's wedged in between before and after. It's like a very small right now. But if you look for a right now, you're not going to find it. It's boundless. And that no edge that we find in space is also a no edge that is there in time, and an ungraspable quality of time. we say that means it's empty. Okay. Now, I'll say a couple things that are a little bit mysterious. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but it's the ungraspability is what we call time. Right? So we think time is ungraspable, but in a way we could flip it. And the fact that there is total ungraspability, the emptiness of any moment, is why there is the plane of time. In the same way that because any dharma is ungraspable, any dharma in spatial relationship is ungraspable. You can't get a hold of it. I mean, you can kind of, you know. You can say onshin. I'm like, okay, onshin. I kind of can get a hold of you, but not really. Like, there's all of this about you that I can't see. Onshin. Sorry. I can't get a hold of. There's always changing all the time. And in whatever level I'm perceiving you at, there's all these other levels, etc. Well, that's what space is. Space is the ungraspability of time. Space is the ungraspability of dharmas. It isn't just the other way around. So anyway, if that turned something, great. If it didn't, don't worry about it too much. We could come back to that to another time. So, this, in one way, could just be like kind of abstract philosophizing, but it is also the basis of practice realization. So that's what Dogen's trying to introduce us to, or is trying to help us develop a deeper relationship with in the Genjo Koan. In a sense, it is Genjo Koan. It is the invitation of what's immediately appearing. Right? Genjo, remember, we go back to those early classes. Genjo is like, what is the thing that's appearing in time and space? Whatever appears to you appears in time and space, and probably a whole bunch of other dimensions we don't know how to name. Okay, but we'll just talk about time and space. That's confusing enough for us. So, time and space. Whatever's appearing is appearing there as that time and space, or through that time and space. That's Genjo. There's an invitation in that. Why is there an invitation? There's an invitation because each one has its own total dharma position. And because it has its own total dharma position, it is the manifestation of all dharma positions are reflected there in that one position, which means whatever the dharma position is, it has infinite characteristics. It has ungraspable qualities. And that's an invitation, not to just sit there and go, I know what it is, but an invitation to have a vibrant life in which the phenomena enlivens you, and you enliven the phenomena. So Dogen had a word for this, which will come up later in the, I forget where it is, maybe in 11 or 12. He might not use this exact term, but he uses something very similar. And the Japanese word is Ippo Gujin. And Ippo means one dharma, and Gujin means like to research or to investigate. That'd be the word. Investigate completely. Like investigate till there's like no, like 100% total investigation. The Japanese term is tsukusu. It's one of my favorite words. My wife says I'm not supposed to say that because it also colloquially it means like to be burnt out. To be the ash. But it's like just go all the way. You don't leave anything back. So Ippo, this Ippo Gujin, one dharma, exhaustively examined, or exhaustively investigated, or exhaustively following the invitation of this one dharma. So when we think about, how do we find our place? How do we find our time in the practice of this awakening? This instruction that Dogen is leading us to, he's laying the framework here for it, that we really have to pay attention to one dharma, and not always be in the discussion of like relation. How does this, this one's big compared to this one becomes small. This one's late. This one's early. These are all relational terms. And late only appears because there's an early, and big only appears because there's a small. And all of the things which we build the framework in our mind of how it is that we encounter phenomena is all in that provisional relationality. That is also a real world. It's called the real world of delusion, right? It also is Genjo Koan. It also is a total functioning. But he's trying to draw our attention from that place where what makes it problematic is we're stuck on it. That's the only way that we regard things. And only regarding them that way, we can't wake up to this other quality. So what did I write here in my note to finish this up? So on this one, finishing up on 8, I had something. I said here and now. Oh, okay. Where and when? So where and when will we practice? Now that could be the question. If we're talking about space and time, then it's like, okay, so where and when is this practice realization? And so here and now won't do. I have to say that's one of my pet peeves when you hear people talking about Dharma and they say, it's just right here, right now. And I always just feel like they must be saying, man, after they say that. It's just right here, right now, man. And then I'm just like, and I get it. It's not, it's too harsh to say that. It is an important thing to hear. Just like, stop being all over the place in your head and just pay attention to what's right here. So it's good instruction. The problem is, you can't find a here and now. So you can say right here and right now, but there's no such thing when it's hemmed in by a there, or a way over there, or by a past and by a future. Those are all just relational heres and nows, and they are just fleeting. And you will never find your real heart of practice there. You just find your kind of like, some inertia and maybe some enthusiasm. And so this is a really kind thing which Dogen's trying to do. He's saying, don't think that practice realization is something that you can sandwich in like that. Right? Don't think that this activity of awakening is locatable in that way. There's a true here and a true now. In this case, true doesn't mean like true as opposed to false. It means true as opposed, like you might say a board is true, is straight. Oftentimes the character for that from Chinese is translated as correct, or sometimes true. So, okay, that's what I have to say about that. You guys want to talk about attaining realization? I mean, check it out. You go to 9, when a person attains realization. Is that like a hook? Did you go like, It's funny because there's a bunch of translations, they super avoid that. They say realization. They don't say when a person attains realization. They just say realization, and then they talk about realization. I think they're like, cowardly translations. But Shohaku Okumura Roshi doesn't shirk from such a thing. Although, I really checked out his commentary on it too, because I was like, oh man, if anyone's going to like dismiss that, it's not dismiss it, but if anyone's going to have something to say about like the idea that there is attainment of realization, it's going to be Okumura Roshi. But he just sort of dodged it, from what I could tell. But he didn't translate it that way. He says when a person attains realization, and that's definitely what the Japanese says. Satori o uru is the Japanese in it. So he says when a person attains realization is like the moon reflecting on the water. Remember I was saying last week how romantic this is going to be. So when he talks about this realization, it's interesting that Dogen Zenji, he starts to talk in images of non-obstruction. So he's going to talk about the moon and the water. He's going to talk about how they don't obstruct each other at all. And he talks about it very poetically here. But he's saying there's no obstruction. Remember the non-separating. That the Buddhas are greatly awakened to delusion. Living beings are greatly deluded about realization. That early on. And I was saying, and if we go look back to the first couple paragraphs where it's life and death, living beings, Buddhas, realization and delusion, that our tendency is to want to separate all of these things. And in the separation, we get stuck. So now he's giving us an image of realization being an image of non-obstruction, where there is water and there's a moon, but they totally interpenetrate each other. Sometimes, have people heard this term before, the gate of not two? This is one of the, when I went to study with my teacher, when I first was, sitting there, this was one of the first things that I really cued into, because the characters are really easy, and so I could read it. That was probably one of the reasons. A lot of the things that were like on things hanging around, I couldn't read because the characters were complicated and in calligraphy. But right above where he always sat, there were these characters. Actually, it was written the other way. Sometimes Chinese and Japanese gets written this way, sometimes this way, sometimes this way. Very rarely this way. Never this way. We're not like biblical Hebrew where you go like this. You don't see that very much either. Sometimes in stamps you do. Anyway, so this just means no two gates. And it can get read lots of different ways. Again, this is one of the beauties of Chinese, is the kind of ambiguity of the characters. They're very precise, but also their relationship is not necessarily located really clearly by a bunch of articles and stuff like we have in English. Like if you translate in English, you say, the gate of not two. There are not two gates. All those articles and the position starts giving you some concrete idea of what it is. But in the Chinese, it's just no two gate. And so one way you can read it is there's not two gates, which is a good way to read it. There's not two gates. There's only one. But also, we can read it, equally good way to read it, the gate of not two. Or we could say a gate of not separation, a gate of non-separation, or a gate of non-duality, people say sometimes. Although I'm not so fond of the term non-dual. So this is one of the ways that we talk about realization, is this gate. So I have a question for you. Think about this for a second. When he says moon reflects in the water, what kind of moon do you see? Mm-hmm. That's pretty common, full moon. Did anyone see a sliver moon? Yeah, some people are fond of full moons and sliver moons. People aren't typically so fond of like a 3/4 moon. It's kind of a lumpy moon, Maybe a 1/4 moon, because it's still getting the crescent kind of appearing, last week the crescent was, the moon was coming up just before the sun, and it was hanging low in the sky, and I love that when it just looks like a smile, because it's so on the bottom of the moon and just a sliver, and it was that kind of like forest fire pink or salmon, it's like that. So anyway, one of the things that's so great about the moon as being involved in these discussions of awakening is that the moon is really wondrous. And what I mean by wondrous here is it's ungraspable. It is marvelous, but its marvelousness comes from our incapacity to really keep tabs on it. The sun's kind of easy to keep tabs on. So it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And it gets a little farther south and a little farther this way, depending on the season. It's not so complicated. Moon, on the other hand, even if you're watching it every day pretty carefully, you can be surprised by a lot of things, that it does. And so the reason I bring that up is the moon is oftentimes a symbol of awakening in Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism. It's very often that way. But I like to warn people, like, don't love the full moon too much. That the full moon's beautiful, but also that's not the point of the moon. The point of the moon is not the full moon, and everything else is like just something else. The moon is that mysterious quality of the moon. So sometimes I would think this, we could say the wondrous moon reflects in clear water, rather than just say the moon in water. But we'll have to take that up with Dogen when we see him later on. And anybody feel kind of like not upset, but kind of like, well, wait a minute. Now you're using this whole reflection thing, but you just told me at last page that it's not like the reflection in a mirror. One side's illuminated, the other side is dark. Maybe anyone think that way? You're like, come on, man! You just told me, like, don't think that way. Think this other way. So a couple, because that's a common thing that people think. Even the really old it's interesting. Even the really old commentaries bring that up, like the ones that were just like a generation after Dogen. They bring up that issue. Like, hey, wait a minute. I thought one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. Why are you talking about this now? And there's a lot of ways that you might work with that. But I think one of the skillful ways is to see what is it that Dogen's leading us into at that particular point. Earlier on, Dogen spends time saying, like these famous lines, that to carry the self forward is delusion, that all things come forward and carry out practice realization through the self is realization. So that's kind of a mirroring, right? He's laying out what the mirroring is. And then he says, but wait a minute, don't stay in a third person perspective. Don't hang out back here and go like, oh, are the things coming forward and realizing me, or am I going forward and realizing them? That removed position is not what practice realization is. So he sets up something. He gives us an image. He gives us some way to understand what's happening. It's like a painting. Right? And the painting is true. But the painting, if we hold on to that painting as being the truth, then we can get stuck in an observational position. And the active principle of the practice realization gets obscured by what could even be a very, very fine teaching. And so that's one way we can think about the relationship between 9 and 10. Is 9 is giving us this kind of image. He's giving us a way to regard something. And then in 10, he's going to talk about, okay, so what do you do with that? What does it mean? What does that investigation look like? Earlier on, he was talking about the intimacy of, I think that was in 5. Yeah. So in this one, he's talking about perceiving intimately. Although we perceive them intimately, it is not like reflections in a mirror or the moon in water. When one side is illuminated, the other side is dark. Okay? So he's talking about what is the intimacy of what we call perceiving. Why is perceiving so intimate? And he says, don't think about that as like you're back here and there's a reflection happening. If you're really in it, there's no flower and reflection of the flower. There's just flower, and the flower has its own Dharma position. It's totally true. So here, he's going to give us this bit about moons and water, and then he's going to teach us how to apply it. Isn't this just so poetic? Enlightenment does not destroy the person as the moon does not make a hole in the water. The person does not obstruct realization as a drop of dew does not obstruct the moon in the sky. The depth is the same as the height. I love that one. The other parts are very poetic and like, it's like, okay, I won't say I thought of it, but like maybe I could have thought of it. But then this one, the depth is the same as the height. It's really, if you think about that in terms of realization, part of what Dogen's pointing us at is, and he's going to get into this later on, next week we'll talk about that, but realization isn't some object of your experience. It's not something that is of view. In a sense, we could say it's not an experience. And the height of the moon, which is totally mysterious, is the depth in the water, even if it's a tiny little drop of water. So if we think about this first section all the way down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, I'll count from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth line from the bottom, it ends with the height. What I was just reading, the depth is the same as the height. Everything above there is a kind of referring to a spatial relationship. There's a moon, and there's water, and there is this reflection in the water. And there's a total mutual identity with no obstruction and also no violence. Right? There just is that. Oh, I erased it. Oh no, there's some over there, just like these jewels. Right? So let's look at these last lines. In order to investigate the significance of the length and shortness of time, we should consider whether the water is great or small and understand the size of the moon in the sky. So strange. So I want to read you another. Actually, I think I'll write it because you might want to write this down. This is, I think, helpful. That is such a poetic statement, and the way that it's translated here is very faithful, but also is so explanatory that I think it can kind of obstruct something that's happening here. This is a more literal translation. Don't pay too much attention to capitals and non-capitals. I just kind of willy-nilly's in there, depending on the current mood, and then I second guess myself and change it, and I don't know. Maybe no capitals anywhere would be the best, or all capitals, or random capitals. The length and shortness of this time. Investigating great water, small water, grasping the breadth of the heavenly moon. This would be a little more faithful to what, if you were reading this in Japanese and you were a Japanese speaker, this is a little more what you would experience in reading that. Whereas when it gets translated into the English, the seams are kind of stitched together a little bit more. So if we think about this in relationship to this moon and water, and we've been talking about a spatial relationship, if we think about this in terms of time, he's saying the length and shortness of this time. This time, by the way, this is a character that means something like the nodal joints in bamboo. So when it's used in this combination with time, it's like a reference to the Dharma position of this time. So this time here is like the firewood. Just this moment, we could say. But not the moment that's sandwiched between the previous moment and the future moment. Just the totality of an instant. So the length and shortness of this time, investigating great water, investigating small water. The greatness of the water, the smallness of the water, and the length and the shortness of the time are parallel, which means they're intimately connected, but not related. Not like, well, this is this way, so that is that way. They're just together. And he speaks of this as grasping the breadth of the heavenly moon. So the heavenly moon is thought to be, one of the reasons this image of water and moon has been so important to people is the moon is thought to be just like infinitely huge. And it really is compared to our size, like when we're seeing it. And we think, oh, it's just this big, but actually it's a massive, massive thing. And then it appears in just even this tiny thing, like the pupil of our eye. It appears totally there. So the grasping the breadth of the heavenly moon, and this grasping is like, I want to say receiving, although the character really says to like grab it. But something about me wants to say receive it. But I can see that it's that, like, we want to grasp it, right? We want to get the moon. Right? We want to get enlightenment.
Grasping of the, not the physical grasping and holding, but the grasping of more around understanding, reaching into understanding grasp.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's how I think about it. Yeah, we want to grasp it. There's grasp is a physical act, but it's a cognitive act. And really the cognitive and physical act probably aren't really separate, but that investigation of time. Well, think about that before and after. If you want to say, he says, he starts out, this part is when a person attains realization. So in the English, to make it make sense, you have to say when. But in the Japanese, you don't have to say that exactly, but it's still kind of implied. Like if you're talking about a person attaining realization, you say, well, where's it located in time? Has it happened yet? Will it happen later? That's what we want to know. If there's a person realizes enlightenment, who's the person? Is it you? Or is it me? Is it Buddha? I want to locate it. And so that's the invitation of the koan in itself. If we say when a person attains realization, already there's this conundrum of space and time. If it is me, at what point? In the past, the present, or the future? Or are those all illusions and it happens through all of them? If that's the case, then why am I so deluded? So those kinds of questions come up. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this means this character means much like in English, it means heavenly in terms of it being like in that upper realm, like up in the sky. But this is also the character for heavenly realms. So like realms of otherworldly, realms of bliss and contentment and forgetfulness and ignorance and forgetting how your body smells. That's what happens to the heavenly beings. They forget how their body smells. And then right before I love this detail, right before they're about to fall out of the heavenly realm, they like remember the smell of their body. And then they're all on their way to fall into the realm of the Asuras or something. So, but the heavenly moon, moon doesn't need to smell itself. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to 10. But I love 10. Tam, what I wrote in my notes here is bam. Bam. Now we got all this moon and the reflection and it all and everything, and it's so poetic and heavenly moon and grasping in time and then he says, when the Dharma has not yet fully penetrated into body and mind, one thinks that one is already filled with the Dharma. Bam. When the Dharma fills the body and mind, one thinks that something is lacking. That's not what I signed up for. I was like, what I signed up for was when the Dharma fills my body and mind, that nagging lack is going to go away. But so that's what I mean by the BAM. He's giving us the kind of explanation. He's giving us an image. He's giving us this way to regard it, just like earlier on when he talked about how beings are relating with each other. And then he said, but when one side's illuminated, the other side is dark. You're not going to grasp this. You're not going to get the pretty picture that you can just live in. You've got to actually encounter. And so he's going to say it's a very similar thing here. This is a section that's about how is this grasping of the moon? How is this attaining of awakening? What is that? Right? He's just given us a picture, but now he's going to say, what is that like? How is it? How is totally exhaustively investigating one Dharma? What's that like? And, we could sum up what he's saying here is it's not like getting it. All the ways we think like it's going to be getting it, that's not what it's like. It's like something else. When you feel like you got it, no. But when you got it, it actually feels like there's a lack. It feels like there's something else. And then he gives this beautiful, I think a very ingenious example. For example, when we sail out in a boat in the ocean beyond sight of land, and when our eyes scan the four directions, it simply looks like a circle. No other shape appears. This great ocean, however, is neither round nor square. It has inexhaustible characteristics. It looks like a palace, a jeweled necklace. As far as our eyes can see, it looks like a circle. All the myriad things are like this. Right? So he's saying every phenomena, in every Dharma position, any phenomena that we look at, it looks like something to us. Of course it does. Of course it appears as firewood or appears as ash. But if you pay attention to it, you're not going to get it. You're not going to just know what it is. It is going to have inexhaustible characteristics. Just like if you go out in a boat in the ocean and it looks like a circle. Of course it looks like a circle. Because that's the quality of your seeing. I've never done that. I really want to, but I get super seasick. The one time I went on a boat with my father-in-law, and then I was like down for 3 days. So I really want to go out. From reading this, I'm like, I want to do that. But it's not so good for me. Maybe if I had a calmer sea, I would be okay. But I have been up on Mary's Peak. Has anyone been on top of Mary's Peak? I like to call it Chati Manli. That's the native name for it. I learned that when I was there. If you go up on Mary's Peak, it's up. You go towards Corvallis and then back in, and you think it won't be that far away because it's just right there by Corvallis. But actually, by the time you get to the top of it, it's a bit of a drive. So beautiful. And it's this tallest peak in the coastal range, and there's not very many tall peaks in the coastal range. So you're just like sticking out of, and sometimes if you're lucky, you can go up there and the clouds will be a little bit low, and you drive through the clouds, and then you appear above the clouds when you get to the top, and then it's just it's a lot like this, and in all the directions, it's just the world looks like a circle, and you might see couple bumps of some mountains peeking out somewhere in the distance. Right? But he's saying, just because it appears like a circle, it doesn't mean it's not a circle, but it doesn't mean it is a circle in the way that you think of it being a permanent circle. It's not a circle or a square. Mm-hmm.
This line about one thinks that something is lacking.
Yeah.
Is that the realizing illusion? Like all of a sudden, instead of like trying to fill it, you just all of a sudden you're just like you realize.
Yeah.
And that lacking becomes so apparent. Yeah.
I think that's a very, very good connection. I hadn't thought of that. So then he makes this reference. He says it has inexhaustible characteristics. It looks like a palace, a jeweled necklace. That's a reference to the way that dragons see water. Dragons see water as a palace, and then they also see it as a jewel. And so he's referencing this way that other beings would see the ocean, not just the way that we might see the ocean. We might also see it as a palace, or we might see it as a jewel. And he says, as far as our eye can see, it looks like a circle. All the myriad things are like this. Within the dusty world and beyond, there are innumerable aspects and characteristics we only see or grasp as far as the power of our eye of study and practice can see. When we listen to the reality of myriad things, we must know that there are inexhaustible characteristics in either oceans or mountains, and there are many other worlds in the four directions. This is true not only in the external world, but it is the same right under our feet or within a single drop of water. Notice there the relationship. He says it's not only in the external world, but also under our feet or within a single drop of water. That single drop of water is not a drop of water that is external to your being. He's oftentimes the drop of water. Water oftentimes is also kind of symbolizes heart or mind. So the fact that he puts that after, it's not out there. He's been talking about water as being out there, right? And now he says, oh, it's not just out there, it's also in here, even though there's not really an out there and in here, but there also is out here and in here. So I just think this is great. Because it's an invitation to what Dogen Zenji calls continual practice. And one way to understand continual practice is that realization is not something that is. It's something that is continually happening. My teacher used to say that to me a lot. He'd say, there's no satori. People know that term, right? Satori? Satori. I think that's how we say it. Satori. So satori would be the correct Japanese pronunciation. This is a noun. But satoru, this is a verb. So he would say, there's no satori. There's only satoru. And if it is real, it happens throughout all mind moments. So it's very challenging when we think about in terms of practice. Another way, so we can understand it that way. Another way Dogen Zenji talks about continual practice is just being how things are. It's not just about what we're going to realize or what we're going to wake up to or how our life is going to be like transformed because of this enlightenment. He's saying that continual practice is the fact of being. That we continually practice. We continually practice delusion. We continually practice realization. And both of those wheels are, continually turning. And for us to be interested in and to investigate and to see that whatever the face of something is an invitation into a continual unfolding of it, as opposed to just now I've experienced this thing. And this is why, last week I was really emphasizing that everything is an opportunity for practice. This is so much Dogen's teaching. Everything is opportunity for practice. It's not just when we're sitting meditations, everything in our life. And this is the reason why, right? Is because that's, everything has that quality. And so everything is an opportunity. Everything's an invitation. Everything that appears, every genjoing is a koan. Everything that appears to you is a like, I don't get it. I don't get it. But also, I'm completely interpenetrated with this thing. And it awakens me. And I awaken to it. So this section is a lot like the one side is illuminated, the other side is dark, because it's not giving you the opportunity to have everything laid out in a mandala of interpenetration. I think I talked about this a few weeks ago in the Dharma talk. The difference between the mandala and the imagery from the Lotus Sutra. That mandalas, I was just reading this a few weeks ago in a book about the history of Vajrayana in Tantric Buddhism, and the scholar was making the point that the mandalas as we know them now, with the Buddha in the center and these worlds of bodhisattvas and beings arrayed around it, those came about at a very similar time to the shift in societal conception about how society is organized. And it had moved from an idea of many, many clans that are all vying for power to a universal monarch, that there would be a universal ruler. And that was happening socially. The very powerful clans had gotten big. They had massive kingdoms. There was larger civilization development, and they were starting to like be monarchs over what seemed like universal quantities of or areas of land. And in that conception, the universal monarch sat in the middle. And then everything could be explained in relationship to that universal monarch. And there are graphs of that universal monarch that are like mandalas. Well, that also then developed in the Buddhist conception of what is the place of the Buddha as being in the center of that mandala and the array that happens from there. They're beautiful. I love mandalas. They also, I slightly don't trust them. And the reason is this, like, just like 9 is so beautiful and gives you this idea of the reflection, the inner penetration, what is the practice of it? If we go to a Lotus Sutra imagery, the Buddha and the assembly are facing each other. They're in an encounter. They're in a dynamic illumination, which is the Buddha's, the light coming from the curl above his eyes, this very special spot that casts out through the eastern quarter and shines down to the deepest hells and up to the highest heavens. Dogen Zenji of that, when he's talking about what's the quality of that light, he says, it's not as if a silken scarf was unfurled from the Buddha's forehead. He has to think of imagery that fits the time, right? They didn't have flashlights. Maybe if he was now, he would say it's not like there was a flashlight in the Buddha's forehead that was beaming light out. It's not like the light was here and then it spread out over everyone. He says the host of beings themselves are the light of the Buddha's illumination. The light is not separate from those beings, and that the Buddha is illuminating them. The beings themselves are the Buddha's illumination. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because think about the difference between those two qualities. The center, that's very easy to locate the center someplace and then to integrate everything and to have a map, a kind of clear seeing. That clear seeing can keep you from awakened activity because you just stay in the idea of the clear seeing. Dogen's always taking aim at that. And so he invites us into this other thing, which is relational, but it's not relational in the relative way of, okay, this is big, this is small. It's relational in the sense that Buddha and sentient beings are meeting each other. And that's happening to you every single moment. The Buddha and the sentient beings are there in a total encounter. And so practice realization is waking up in that encounter. Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna go to bed now. People, this is always a challenging time, by the way, because when it's getting darker and it's getting colder, and 8:30 feels a lot later and sleepier, and my voice gets more soothing, and I just talk on and on. But we have 2 more classes, so I'd highly encourage you to come to those and maybe have a cup of coffee around 6:15, and we'll make it through. I'm very excited. I will just say I know I said that we would go on to 11 and 12 next week, but this part, fishes and water and swimming. And those of you who got to hear June's talk about the Genjo Koan, it was so amazing. Did people hear that? Like she literally read, she was like 30 something and her life was a wreck. And she like picked up a book and it was like, she read this and it just like, but she said she didn't even know, she had no idea what it meant, but it just like stuck in her heart and it allowed her to do something. She knew that there's something that needed to be done and she was able to do it, even though she didn't have an understanding. That's what Dogen does offer us. It's not that it just that happens all the time, but I am so inspired by that story. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami.